Okay. Where did our waiting room go? Tatiana, can you still see them?
I think they have to start it on their own. So there's more attendees coming right now.
Okay. Oh, I see them now in the other column. Great. Welcome, everyone. People are joining and trickling in. David, it looks like there's actually two of you for some reason.
Oh, you seeing double?
I see one of you, and then there's another David without a video.
Strange.
Is that me?
Is that-
Who's that?
David, because you sent me the link.
Oh, so this is Susie Frenzel, who's my boss.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Hi, Susie.
Hey. I was wondering, like, when I signed in, I'm like, David, I was like, oh, I just thought he was on the line, but I didn't realize I was logging in as David. But okay, I apologize. I don't
Okay,
mean
yeah, we had sent David a special link as a panelist.
I will not be a panelist. I'll just be listening. So I'll just mute myself.
Okay, no problem. Right. Give people a few more moments and then we'll start sharing in just a moment. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. We are really grateful that the Crime Lab decided to join us and share the good work that they're doing. For those of you who are new to our organization and the work that we do, this webinar is being hosted by Data for Indigenous Justice, and we home the database for missing and murdered Indigenous people here in Alaska. And we use that information for advocacy and for making change. And part of the work that we do is we have, we constantly reclaim the data and information, and we do a lot of advocacy on data systems change for our people. And we also do community building with Tatiana here and my team, and really connecting with families and hearing from folks on the ground in the front lines. And then we also have a fellowship program. So that's like the short, the short spiel of our work. But my name is Charlene Upbuck. Anupak Siska Akpik. My Anupak name is Akpik. Chinik Mugarunga, Sulina Chirvik Mugarunga, Akaga Sandra Baby Lu, Apak Ilhila Evan Luklan. My family's from Gullivan and White Mountain. My mother is Sandra Baby Lu Upbuck, and my son, who is 10 years old, is Evan Luklan. And I gratefully reside in Dagayakak here on unceded lands of Danaina people. So thank you for joining us today. I'm gonna also have my team, Tatiana and Sabrina, introduce themselves, and then our speaker, David. But go ahead, Tatiana, do you want to share who you are?
Hi, everyone. My name's Tatiana Ticknor. I am the program coordinator for Data for Indigenous Justice.
Thank you. Tatiana puts together all of the events, so like, little applause for her. She does a lot of work both for the Alaska Working Group and for our organization, putting together all the events like this. So thank you, Tatiana. Sabrina?
Hi, my name is Sabrina Dunfree. I live in Palmer and I am Dena'ina and Inupiaq. My family is from Tyonek in Unalakleet.
Awesome. Thank you, Sabrina. She makes everything keep going and running behind the scenes. Would not be able to do this without her. So thank you, Sabrina. And for those of you online and in the chats, there is a Q&A, and we'll be using the Q&A a little bit if you're comfortable. So feel free to engage when prompted. We're going to aim to have this be a lunchtime webinar. If we do go over, just a heads up, this is recorded and then we share it out with all the registrants again, so it can be shared with others as things come up. So the intention is to get the information out there and make sure it's accessible. So feel free, we'll send you the recorded webinar afterwards. But David, thank you for joining. I'm really excited to have you. A little background, our working group, the MMIW G2S Alaska Working Group, connected with David and his team at the end of last year, and it was just a really good partnership, and we learned a lot from one another about how our work intersects. And so we were just excited to follow back up and see how we could share this information more broadly. So thank you for taking the time and effort to join us today and putting together slides, and hopefully we have some Q&A time at the end. But if you want to share your introduction and get us started, we appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me. I've been working in the forensic science field for around 20 years at this point. I started my career in the UK with the Forensic Science Service, where I worked for 5 or so years, and then left the UK, married my wife, who is from Alaska, and we moved back up to here to her home. And so we've been here for 12 years at this point, and I've been working at the crime lab the whole time. I've been in the position of chief of the crime lab for the last 6 years, and I'm really excited to share with you all of the work that we do, and going to take you on a virtual tour of the building, explain the different services and testing that we do and what our mission is, and then answer any questions that you guys may have for me. So I can now see the chat, so if you want to put questions in the chat, please go ahead, and I will try and answer those as we go, or we should have some time at the end for me to answer those as well. Okay. Let me just see if I can. Does this work? Okay, so I'm going to start with a question for you all. What are the first words that come to mind when you think of the Alaska Scientific Crime Detection Lab, otherwise known as the Crime Lab? Just wanted to kind of gauge the room and try and find out where everyone's at. And you can put what it is you're interested in finding out, or just what your experience has been, or how you've interacted with us in the past. But I'd love to see your information in the chat.
Then if you can't chat, you can put it in the Q&A box.
Yeah, I see one in the Q&A. Cool stuff. I appreciate that. I still think it's very cool.
I think of the beautiful artwork on the outside. I used to work at the hospital, and so I would drive past that all the time. So that's strangely the first thing I think of.
Yeah.
I don't know the history behind that artwork.
We're very, very lucky with the building. It's not every crime lab in the country looks like ours. We have the space. We've been able to grow and expand, which is excellent. It was needed. We're well funded, and so we're really appreciative of where we are. And part of that is the building, and as you say, the artwork that goes into making it feel like a place you would want to come to work. And so that sculpture out front represents a victim's journey through the criminal justice system. And so for anyone who's seen it, it's a series of glass colored panels, and it catches the light really beautifully in the winter. And so it starts very chaotic and disorganized. And as it represents the victim's journey through the criminal justice system, it becomes more and more organized and orderly, and hopefully allows the victim to get justice in the end. So yeah, seeing a few more here: DNA analysis, rape test kits, the sculpture outside. Having a crime lab here seems helpful. Yeah, I think it's necessary for us to have a crime lab. I think we have different set of conditions and different crimes, and to transfer all of that evidence to somewhere in the lower 48 to be tested, and then potentially to fly people up to testify in cases. I don't think that would be in the best interests of Alaska. So, okay. Thank you for your input on that slide. So our mission is to provide scientific support to the criminal justice system to help create a safer Alaska. And we do this through a number of ways. I think we've, in the past, really focused on just thinking about the testing and the testimony that we do. But there's a whole bundle of work that goes into making a good crime lab. So we do interpretation of data, we do quality assurance, which is a huge part of our work. Last month, we just had our accreditation assessment. So we flew in, I think, 8 or it was about 10 people from around the country to come and assess our lab and make sure we were following procedures and meeting these national standards. And we were, which was great. We do a lot of testimony. Our analysts testified around 92 times around the state last year. Sometimes we go to crime scenes. We do lots and lots of training. For different things, from crime scene training to training with SART nurses and the sexual assault program. And then increasingly, we've been looking at our position here and trying to understand what data do we have that maybe other parts of the criminal justice system don't have yet, and how we can share those and make sure the information flows in the way that it needs to flow in order for people to get the justice that they need and deserve. So this is the next graphic is where I task all of our staff, where we need to be as a lab is the intersection of these 3 components. So I want everything that we do here to be understandable to both the people who are submitting the evidence in, the law enforcement agencies, and to the criminal justice system, and potentially to juries and families of victims when they're in the courtroom, for them to understand what we do and to take these really difficult scientific concepts and make them something that is relatable and understandable to people without that scientific background and training. It also needs to be justifiable. We need to make sure that the science we're doing here is the top quality science that is all supportable by the data and the research that goes into it. And the last thing is we want to be as transparent as possible. And so although we have defined customers that we work with, a law enforcement agency, upon discovery, we want to have all of the information collected in a way that can be then shared with the criminal justice system, and nothing's done behind closed doors. Everything is documented and then discoverable. So that's where we want to be: transparent, understandable, justifiable. And my staff get really fed up of me mentioning those things, but I love an opportunity to talk about them. So how big are we? Here's this beautiful sculpture that we talked about. Even though we have this huge building, 84,000 square feet building, and a huge campus we're very lucky to have, there aren't a huge amount of people that work there. We're 50 staff within the state crime lab, and then there are 6 or 7 within the Anchorage Police Department who have their own mini crime lab in our crime lab, who work to all of our policies and procedures. We have other components in the building with us. We've recently been incorporated into a new division, the Division of Victim Assistance and Forensic Science, which is fantastic. They also have other components such as the DVSA training program, victim navigators, the Missing Persons Clearinghouse, the Council on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, the Violent Crime Compensation Board. All of these are parts of the division that we're in, and most of them are in the building with us. But on the scientific side of things, it's around 50 for us, and that includes mostly about 35 or 36 scientific staff who are doing the testing. And we do the testing for the whole state. So although we work for the Department of Public Safety, we receive cases from all of the 43 or 44 law enforcement agencies across the state. So in terms of our lab, you can see on the bottom right picture, this is what the lab looks like from the outside, and these are some of the views on the inside. Again, we are so lucky to have this and the beautiful views and the things that make it a nice place to work. But in terms of the disciplines that we have, the different scientific disciplines, the lab is really split into 3 big chunks. The first of that is biology, or DNA. So these are the things that we're doing. We're looking for body fluids, we're looking at hairs, and ultimately we're trying to determine if there is any material that has DNA present, and then whose DNA that is. The second of our big disciplines, whoopsie, clicked the wrong button, sorry, is chemistry. And so most of what's going on in here is drug analysis and blood and breath alcohol analysis. The ones in red are other types of forensic testing that we don't currently do up here. And we don't do them for different reasons. Some of them don't meet that criteria of being as justifiable as we would like them to do. And some of them we just don't have enough resources to do that kind of testing. So there's a lot that goes into building a scientific program. There's a lot of, it's not just doing the testing. We have to go through a training program and have certification for our staff and make sure that they have enough cases to do in a given year so they can stay proficient and competent in doing those things. And so there are various reasons why we don't have some of these testing services here right now. The physical section is the third big section. So most of this is fingerprints, firearms, tool marks, footwear impressions. But we also do some physical matches and serial number restoration and a small amount of crime scenes. And then again, the ones in red are the ones we don't currently do here. Sometimes if we do get a request to do that kind of testing, we'll work with the law enforcement agency to find a lab in the lower 48 who's able to do this kind of testing, but we really don't get a lot of requests for these types of testing in a given year, the ones you see under physical in red. And then the digital forensics lab is, so the Department of Public Safety does have what they call the Technical Crimes Unit, which is a unit of scientists who look for information from phones and computers, digital forensics. It's not under the crime lab. We don't have any authority over them. They work independently of us with the troopers, but the state does have an option for this. So this is one of the big things that people misunderstand about what we do. And when we say we're scientists, everyone assumes that we're spending all of our time in the lab doing scientific work and looking at data and evidence samples. Actually, that's probably not true. It's probably closer to 50-50 in terms of the amount of time we spend in the lab versus the time we spend in the office side, writing up reports, interpreting data, reviewing other people's case files, working with Department of Law, working with submitting agencies, trying to set up meetings, having quality assurance discussions. So it's closer to 50-50. And a really small amount of the time, we're actually going out to testify in cases. And so we receive about 7,000 or 8,000 requests for work cases each year. And of those, maybe only 100 end up going to court. And so that's a small percentage of the work that we end up going to testify in the courtroom. But it does make our job kind of unique amongst scientific job classes. I think a lot of scientific job classes really rely on people with good analytical skills, the ability to understand and analyze the data, but maybe they don't focus so heavily on communication. And that's a huge part of what we do, is all of the good work we've done on the science side of things is lost if when we go to the courtroom, we're not able to explain that to the juries and have people understand what we do. And so we really focus on the intersection of having someone who's really good with the science, but also somebody who's good at talking to people and can communicate as well. So thinking of our first big discipline here, this is our chemistry discipline. And by volume, they get the most number of requests every year. So about 12 to 1,400 requests are coming in, a request for seized drug analysis. So these are ones where the law enforcement agency has arrested somebody and they find that they have a substance on them or in their home or somewhere in a vehicle where the law enforcement suspects that that's a controlled substance and is illegal to have. And the question that they're asking is what is this substance and is it illegal? And so the evidence comes into us and we have a whole different barrage of tests that we can do, starting with this one in the top left. Can you see my mouse pointer moving around? Can someone give me a thumbs up if you can see that?
Oh, very, very small, but I can
Okay.
see it now.
Okay. I will describe it instead of relying on the pointer. So the one in the top left with the little bottles and then the container with the different colors in it. This is a series of chemical tests that we can do. So when the substance first comes in, we're going to do some preliminary tests to try and determine what family of drugs it may come from. So is it an amphetamine? Is it an opioid? And these different chemicals are going to give us indications. Next one, if we move clockwise to the one in the top right, this instrument is called a TrueNarc instrument. And it's a really cool one. It's fairly new. It's only been around maybe 5 or 6 years. So this one works with powders, light colored powders in baggies. We don't have to open the bag and sample it. We can scan it through the packaging, provided the packaging is clear, see-through. We scan it and it shines a laser into the crystal in the bag, and the way that the light is then scattered and returned to the detector in the instrument itself will be indicative of what it is. And so it's able to tell us very quickly, is this methamphetamine or is this fentanyl? What it doesn't work on is dark colored substances. So if we're talking about heroin and it's brown, what happens is the laser, too much of the light is absorbed into the substance and it starts to heat it, which is obviously not good at all. So those two are kind of preliminary tests that we do. And then the majority of what we do, the confirmatory or final test that we're going to do is in the bottom right. And these are using these GCMS, which stands for gas chromatograph mass spectrometer. So these instruments are going to smash the molecules apart into tiny little fragments, and then we're going to run the fragments through a tube, and based on how fast they go through the tube, it's going to tell us, it's going to give us a signature or a chemical fingerprint of the substance. And so this on the bottom left is what we would get off that instrument. It's a graph with a series of peaks, which tells us what the molecule is. And so this one, you probably can't read it, but up in the top of it, it says meth. This is what methamphetamine looks like when it comes off this instrument. And you can see I use methamphetamine because that is the top substance that we've identified. This is just a chart of all of the types of drugs that we've identified over the last 6 months. And methamphetamine is the #1 thing that we're seeing by, almost double or more than double the next one. Fentanyl is the next one down. This is a really problematic substance that the lower 48 started seeing problems with fentanyl, started seeing fentanyl come into people's lives around 10 years ago. We didn't really see that until maybe the last 4 or 5 years, but it really has picked up, and now it's the second most common thing that we're seeing. It's very potent and can lead to people overdosing, which is obviously a real concern for the public health and public safety communities. So we have all of these different substances. One of the challenges that this discipline has is that sometimes people who are making these drugs make them in such a way as to change the arrangement of the chemicals in there, and to make them still have the same effect on a human body, but they're no longer illegal. And so we're trying to keep up on that and trying to identify these new substances that we can then provide that information to the Controlled Substance Advisory Board, and for them to make a determination whether they want to go on and make that scheduled controlled substance in the future or not. Chemistry section also deals with alcohol analysis. So there's typically this is in one of two forms. Either somebody has been arrested probably for a DUI offense, and they've had their blood taken, and we're going to analyze that in the same way using GCMS. We take a sample from the GCMS, and then we're able to determine how much alcohol is present in their blood. Or more commonly out in rural communities, we have these data master instruments. So these are breath alcohol instruments. We have a fleet of around 90 of those that are deployed all the way around the state. So if somebody's arrested, they're taken into the police station and they're asked to blow into these instruments. They blow, and the instrument's then able to determine how much alcohol is in their breath. And so we are often then asked to go on and testify in these kind of cases where the question is was the person over the legal limit for driving? Moving on to our physical section, the bulk of the work here is in the fingerprints world. And so if somebody has broken into a house and they've touched something in the house, maybe the officer then goes in and collects the thing that was touched. It could be anything from a pop can to a weapon, cardboard boxes, tape, money. We get lots of different things coming through this section. The first part of the process is to try and find if there are any fingerprints, what we call latent fingerprints present. So we have lots of different chemical methods that we can use. The typical one is super glue. So we apply some, we hang it up in a chamber, the item up in a chamber. We add some super glue, we heat the super glue and add some humidity to it. And then the super glue turns into a vapor, and then will bind to the residue that was left behind in your fingerprints, your sweats and oils and water residue. Then we can apply different chemicals to that to make it turn different colors and introduce more contrast between the background and the foreground, these are different ways of processing and developing those. Then they move over to search them in a database of fingerprints. And if they find, if the database says these are some potential matches, then we're able to look at those. And you can see on the left-hand side of this screen is the one that came from the crime scene sample. And these are just mock ones. Everything I'm going to show you is mostly mocks today. So you can see that there's a series of red dots on this. We're looking for these minutiae or events. They can be like ridge endings, so where one of the ridges ends. We can look for a bifurcation, which is where a ridge splits. We look for little islands or incipient ridges stuck in between them. And so the person who's doing the analysis is going to mark up the questioned impression on the left first, and then they get the known impression on the right, and they look for these same characteristics in the known impression. And if they find 10, 12, 15 of these corresponding features, they're able to match those fingerprints together and identify the person. We do footwear impressions. And so one of the big benefits of doing footwear impressions is that we're able to get them from lots and lots of different surfaces. So on the left, we see dusty impressions. Moving into the right, we see impressed ones down in sand, snow, mud, dirt. We have wet ones coming from a wet area into a dry area. We have deposited ones where somebody has stepped in mud and then walked inside a house. And then sometimes you get ones on bodies. If somebody has been kicked with enough force, what happens is the skin will pinch up between the tread of the shoe and the capillaries burst, and you get a bruise, which looks like the areas of the shoe that didn't make contact. It's a negative impression. So from those impressions, we're able to then run them through a database, and we say to the database, okay, I want to see all the shoes that have a square with a little circle in the middle, and I want to see all the shoes that have these hollow shapes in the heel. And pretty soon we're able to tell the officers some really good investigative information and give them from what looks like a mess at the crime scene to be able to tell them, here's a picture of the shoe that was at this crime scene. And here's what it looks like. Then the officer goes out and collects the shoe in and submits that in to us. And we're able to look at the shoe and determine if that was the shoe that made that impression or not. And so the way we do that is we look at the design and the size, what we call class characteristics. Those are things that are going to be discriminating, but not super discriminating. And then we're going to look at how the shoe has been worn over the course of its life. And then we're able to find these little small, what we call randomly acquired characteristics, little nicks, cuts, scratches. You can probably see a tiny one here. It's probably only 1 millimeter or 2 big. A big chunk's been taken out of it here, a deformation of the circle here. And we're able to get to the same position like fingerprints, where we're able to identify the shoe as having made that impression. Moving on to our firearms section. So most often the question that's being asked here is which gun fired the bullet or left the cartridge casing behind at the scene, or was it this gun that did it? So this is the question that's being asked. The way they do it is they use comparison microscopes. So the top left picture is a picture of our comparison microscope. We take the crime scene sample and we mount it on the stage on the left of this microscope. And then we take some test fires from the gun and we mount it on the stage on the right. And what we're able to do is to look at them the same time as each other. And you can see, if you can see my mouse pointer, this one is the crime scene sample, and this one is the known sample from the gun. And this line down here is what we call a hairline, and we're able to slide that back and forth to look at the two samples at the same time. And so what we can see on this one, this is the head stamp of a cartridge case. We're able to see that the striations, which are the tool markings that were left behind as the firearm was made and are going to be distinctive to that firearm, the striations really do match between the crime scene sample and the known sample. We can read them across almost like a barcode and see that they're in the same configuration, which to us, or to our firearms analysts, means that that is the gun that fired that cartridge. So that, again, can be really good evidence for us. Moving on to DNA, which is where we're going to spend the majority of our time today. DNA is like a 5-step part to the process. So the first part of it is what we call screening. That's where the evidence comes in to our lab, and we could be looking at anything from a knife or a firearm, some clothing, some bedding. It could be some swab samples that are part of a sexual assault kit. It could be any type of sample. And the first question we're asking is there any material present that may have DNA on it? What we know is that some body fluids are very good samples for having DNA in them. So blood, semen, and saliva are really good. Sometimes you can get DNA from touch. So if somebody has left behind some skin cells from touching something, we're able to potentially get a DNA profile there. The touch DNA doesn't tend to be as, we don't get as much DNA from it, but sometimes it can be present. So the first part of that process, once we've gone through and we've tried to find if there's any body fluids, is now we have to take the DNA and we have to extract it. So DNA lives inside your cells in your body. All of your cells except your red blood cells will have DNA in them. We're going to add some detergent, which is going to puncture your cell membrane, split the membrane apart, which allows the DNA to then come out of into a solution for us. The second part is we're going to quantify it and find out how much DNA is present and how much of that DNA is a male DNA versus a female DNA. You can imagine this is usually a question that's pretty pertinent to be asked in terms of a sexual assault, where there's a female victim and a male suspect. Knowing what the ratio of male to female DNA gives us an indication of how much we need to do amplification, how much separation we need to do between those two profiles. And so this just gives us male to female ratios and lets us know how much is present. The third part of it is really the cool part, and this is what we call DNA amplification. So we use a method called polymerase chain reaction, or PCR. So if you look at the cycle, if you look at this part, the single ladder, this represents a DNA, a portion of your DNA, a portion of your double helix. It's kind of like a ladder that's been wrapped around, twisted around itself. That's what DNA looks like. So what we're going to do is we introduce some enzymes which are going to split those double helix apart into two constituent strands. And then we're going to add the building blocks of DNA and some heat. And we make from one copy, we go on, we've split the top part of this one has made the top part of this one, and the bottom part of this one has made the bottom part of this one. And then we've made 2 copies of it, and we do another cycle, and we go from 2 copies to 4 copies. And then we do another cycle, and we go from 4 copies to 8 copies. And so we can make multiple copies of this, and we usually do around 29 to 32 cycles, which makes enough DNA then for our instruments to be able to read the sample and to get a DNA profile. And that's what this is. So this is the last part of the DNA in-lab process, is to run it on a genetic analyzer and to determine what the profile looks like. And then we can compare it against reference samples. We can compare it to the CODIS database to try and determine if this sample has been seen at other crime scenes. So what you're seeing here is each one of these areas, or loci, as we call them. So this one says D8S1179. At this location, this person has a loci number 13, allele number 13. So that means that they're getting the same allele from their mum and their dad. They're getting a number 13. If we move on to the third position, D7S820, you can see that they have two different peaks. That shows that they're getting one of these alleles from mom and one of the alleles from dad. Sometimes we see 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 alleles, which to us is then an indication that we're seeing a mixture of different people's DNA. Sometimes this is common when we see firearms come in and we swab the handle of the firearm and we see like 5 different people have touched that firearm over time. And it's very difficult for us to then pull those mixtures apart and determine whose DNA are we seeing. Next year, we're really excited. We're going to introduce something called probabilistic genotyping, which is a really cool statistical model, which is going to be allow us to go a little bit further in those cases where we have a mixture and pull those mixtures apart and try and determine who may be contributing to those mixtures. So we're excited to see that happen probably next year. So one of the questions I often get is, why does it take so long to do DNA work? Well, the big answer to this is in this chart here. Once the case comes into us and gets assigned to an analyst, the analyst gets maybe 5 to 10 cases in a batch of cases. They probably spend 1 to 2 weeks in the lab doing all of the steps that I've just shown you, those 4 or 5 steps that we've gone through. Then they go back and they take that data back to their desk and they'd spend another 1 to 2 weeks writing it all up for their 5 to 10 different cases, writing it into reports that then go to the criminal justice system. And then after that, it has to go to another analyst who's going to also review all of that and make sure that they've followed all of the procedures correctly and they've interpreted the data correctly. So that takes another 1 to 2 weeks. So the quickest we're going to start doing these cases, even if we had people waiting for these cases to come in the door, the quickest we're going to do these is about somewhere between 3 to 6 weeks. Probably closer to 6 weeks. In reality, we're not at the position where we can work these cases immediately when they come through the door. We've seen our submissions go up pretty much every year since we've been in the building we're in. So when we started in this building in 2012, we received 300 requests for DNA work in that 1 year. Last year, we got close to 1,200 requests, so 400% increase in the submissions that we've seen coming in. We are able to keep up with that work. We've had some new staff come on, and we've been lucky that the commissioner has worked very hard and advocated for us and done a great job in getting us the positions we need. We have a little bit of a lag while we're training those positions, but I'm really confident we're going to get our turnaround times to between 60 and 90 days over the next couple of years, which for a DNA section is very, very fast. For the in terms of what that means for the public, it probably isn't fast enough or where they would like to see us be. But with the current technology we have, this is about where we as quick as we can get between that 60 to 90 day window. One exciting thing I'm able to share with you today is we've been working hard. I tasked our DNA section with validating a method to extract DNA from bones. So this has not been something we've been able to do in the past, but sometime this year, we're expecting to have a protocol online whereby we can extract DNA from bones and then compare it in unidentified human remains cases. If a direct relation of the person who may have been deceased is able to provide a sample to us, we're then able to compare it directly without going to any databases to the profile from the bone. So it'd have to be a mother or a father, a genetic direct descendant, mother or father, or a child of the person who's deceased. We're able to then compare those samples directly and determine if this is the person who may have been who is suspected to have been deceased. We can also work if the person was deceased in another state. It the profile may go into CODIS as a unidentified human remains profile, which doesn't get compared against all of the crime scene profiles or anything like that. And then if we are able to get a volunteer sample from the family member, we can upload it into the CODIS, again into the unidentified human remains volunteer sample section. And those two things can be compared against each other and potentially generate a hit, so we can offer some closure to those families. Turnaround times here, this data is a little out of date at this point, but I wanted to show you a whole year's worth of data so you can get some proportions. our data runs from July 1st through June 30th. So this is last year's data. Early July, I'll be writing another annual report for this current year's worth of data, but I wanted you to see a full year's worth of data. So what you can see in the column that says FY24, that means fiscal year 24. This is the number of cases that we've received in that year of all of these different evidence types. So you can see forensic biology is 1,141, that's DNA. Seized drugs is close to 1,400 cases. DNA database, which I haven't mentioned yet, we got nearly 10,000 samples. So these are the samples that are collected usually by Department of Corrections when somebody is arrested or is a convicted offender for a whole list of offenses, all of them mostly crimes against a person. They would have their DNA collected, it's submitted into us. We work those samples and upload them into CODIS and potentially get matches against things like property crimes. Sometimes we get sexual assaults. We've had serial sexual assaults, homicides. It's a really powerful investigative tool to allow the law enforcement to determine if somebody may be linked to a crime. It can also be used to exonerate. Sometimes we develop a profile, say in a sexual assault, and then we develop that profile, we provide the hit to law enforcement, and then they, sometime later, the person comes into custody, and we find out who it was, but it was a consent partner for the victim survivor. And so it can go both ways for us. You can see on the left column, which says backlog. I want to reassure you all that when we say backlog, we're not talking about these huge amounts of previously unsubmitted sexual assault kits. The state did have issues with that back in 2015, 2016, 2017. All of those cases have now been tested. There was around 570 of them from the troopers, and then about 2,500 of them from different law enforcement agencies around the state. All of that testing is now done. What you can see in the backlog is just the cases that are now coming in to be worked in over time, like current cases, what I would say. You can see YTD TRT. We use lots of acronyms, I apologize. That means the year-to-date turnaround time, and this is a stat that is in days. So this is how long it was taking in days for that reporting period for those samples to be worked. So you can see alcohol is very quick, just 22 days. Crime scenes is quick, up to firearm tool marks. That's a lot more complicated. Each case can probably take 2 or 3 weeks to be worked, and they tend to be very involved cases. They tend to be homicide cases, things like that are really complex to be worked. So they take a little bit longer. The column on the right-hand side of this chart is the difference in submissions in between years. So we saw a 1% increase in forensic alcohol between year 23 and 2024. Drugs was exactly even. Forensic biology was slightly down. We saw less DNA database samples coming in that year, and less of some of the other things as well. Some of them are fairly static and some of them fluctuate a lot. Again, I'll be able to provide more data come July of this year. We'll be able to have another year's worth of data. A couple of really important, impactful projects that the Crime Lab has initiated. So on the back of those previously unsubmitted testing backlogs, one of the issues was that nobody really had a good insight into where all those sexual assault kits were in the state. And one solution to that is to build a tracking system. So right away from the point that the sexual assault kit is collected by the medical provider through submission by the law enforcement to the Crime Lab, we now have a kit tracking system in place. We got a grant to do this in 2020, and we deployed the system in summer 2023. It is now fully operational and working. It's called TrackKit. It really does improve the transparency. And importantly, it does that most for the victim survivors. And so if they choose to opt into this system, they get notifications when the kit is moved, when it's been submitted into the lab or released from medical to law enforcement. The victim never has to re-engage with the law enforcement, which can be pretty traumatic for them. that they're able to then do it on their own time. They can do it on their phone. They can find out where their kit is, and they can be reassured that their kit's not going to sit around on a shelf, not being tested for months and years, that it's going to be worked. And then the law enforcement, once the kit has been tested, regardless of whether they are in the track kit system or not, they would get notified by law enforcement that it's been tested within 14 days. Early indications from this system are that it really is being used by victim survivors, which to me makes the whole effort and process worthwhile. That we're seeing that over 50% of victim survivors are choosing to engage with this process and are choosing to follow their process along, which is really big for us and makes us know that we've done the right thing in making this system a reality. Similarly, we've deployed this program last summer called the Forensic Science Hit Outcome Program. And so when we, before this system was deployed, we would, if we got a DNA hit to an individual in a case, that means we've identified an individual in a case, we would send this notification via email to law enforcement. What we know is that that email's not a perfect system. Sometimes emails get deleted or they get filed away and actions don't happen. And so we wanted to build a system by which law enforcement could track their hits, and they could provide oversight and accountability for their hits. So we built this system. It looks and feels a lot like the track kit system. It uses the same platform, but it really does allow law enforcement to go in and say, okay, I can see we've had these 7 hits to a specific individual. Now we can go away and make sure that we do our follow-up and maybe we get notified if that sample is a consent partner, or maybe it's the victim from a crime. We know that sample shouldn't be in CODIS, and then we can remove that sample out of CODIS, the DNA database. And so it's a really good feedback loop for us to make sure only the samples that should be in CODIS stay in CODIS. And it's a good tool for them to make sure that their investigations are progressing along and that nothing gets left behind. So that is it for me. I was aiming for 45 minutes. I'm sorry, I am 1 minute over. But I have lots of time for questions if anyone would like to ask any. And again, thank you for your time and allowing me to present for you.
A virtual clapping for you. Thank you so much, David. I was frantically writing many notes on my little Post-its are getting full. We appreciate all the work of your team and for sharing how much goes into this and all of the steps and the time. I think the time alone, like the timelines, really are illuminating for families. And I know that I'm eager to let people know the new process for the sexual assault kits, I think, and especially, I think just healing from 2015 when people were aware that there's that backlog, and to where we are today is really hopeful. So thank you all for that wonderful work and everything that you're doing. We do have some questions. So there was one from one of the earliest slides. Someone asked, what's the difference between THC and cannabis? So I think this is when we were talking about the, yeah, one of the earlier slides.
So THC stands for tetrahydrocannabinol. It really is the active part of marijuana or cannabis. And so they're kind of the same thing, but THC is what we're actually looking for when we get those samples in. That's the part that we would be measuring and to determine if it is a psychoactive substance. But Alaska has legalized THC. We don't get a lot of those cases coming in anymore.
Okay, thank you. And then we had someone ask, does the crime detection lab cover computer forensics? And if so, at what capacity?
So that's not something that we do at the crime lab. The Department of Public Safety does have a technical crimes unit. And so it is done through the department, but it's not done here at the crime lab.
All right. And then in your introduction, I think people are personally wondering, you had mentioned you're originally from Wales.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think most people can hear that it's kind of British, but not purely English. So I appreciate you making the distinction for me. Wales is like a tiny part of the UK. There's only maybe 2.5 to 3 million people there, and it's a very small country compared to Alaska. Maybe it's like 300 miles north to south. So it's a teeny little place. We have lots of mountains, or what we call mountains. You guys probably wouldn't call them mountains. They're kind of small in comparison. But it doesn't. Parts of the UK remind me of Alaska. And I like being outside and in nature, and I'm very grateful to be able to do that here as well.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing about your background. And then someone has a question for the bones that are going to be tested. How is this information going to be relayed to the public for those who have loved ones missing or murdered?
That's a great question. I don't know that we have a specific strategy on that yet. I will be working with the Public Information Office and with the missing and murdered groups within the Department of Public Safety to try and put that information out there. We'll also be putting notifications out through the medical examiner's office and to all of law enforcement. Whenever we bring a new service online, we do send it primarily to law enforcement first, but realizing that there's a bigger impact to this one, I think that's good for us to put something out publicly. So I'll work with our Public Information Office and make sure that information can get out as widely as possible.
Yeah, thank you for that question and for the answer. I know that from my time in research, we also have the Alaska Area Specimen Bank that I think a lot of people don't know exists as well. But that specimen bank was put together with by and for Alaska Native leadership, and they've done a lot of work around getting input on best practices and just like ethical handling and good communication with Alaska Native people, as our bodies and our remains can be a really sensitive issue culturally and spiritually. So I appreciate that coming up as well. And I think that there's been really good work over there across the street about how to do that well. And then another question came in. Do you use data to prove Alaska Native blood ancestry? So are there those kinds of racial and ethnic categories tracked?
So we don't do it for that purpose. I believe that when reference samples from people are collected, that the individual is asked to identify which Alaska Native group that they belong to or identify with. And so that information is recorded at that point in time. And then we do have stats based on the frequency. Remember the graph with the different alleles? We have charts that allow us to determine how frequently some of these alleles are in different populations, not just with Alaska Native populations, but Caucasian and African American and all different ones. That's very common amongst different crime labs in the country. But we don't do specific testing. I don't believe we do specific testing to try and determine that for like a criminal purpose.
Right. And then I had a question about, I wouldn't say it happens a lot, but we have had it happen. I mean, even one time is too many, but because we have so many remote places in Alaska, sometimes families and community members or VPSOs, different folks have and families have had to protect crime scenes or be asked to gather evidence or to protect evidence because law enforcement isn't always available, or we can't get them in for weather, whatever the situation may be that comes up in rural Alaska. Are there things you would want people to know about those situations where they're being asked to protect evidence or gather it in remote communities?
Yeah, I think that probably is a question that the law enforcement would be better answering than us from a forensic science perspective. We want the evidence to be in its natural state as much as possible. And so to not think of it like if there was a shoe impression, then the more people are walking over that evidence, the less we're able to do with that shoe impression. or if we're looking for touch DNA, the more people that have touched something, the less likely it is we're able to get touch DNA from it. So as a general principle, we want people to interact with that evidence as little as possible. That being said, there are going to be situations in which it's very important to determine if the person is okay and to interact with that person, that are going to necessitate them approaching them and interacting with them. So I think I would recommend that you would work with your local Department of Public Safety or local police force to try and get some better understanding or specific training in the event that does come up.
Great. Well, I'm also going to thank you so much for answering all the questions, and thank you everyone for asking questions and engaging. Oh, we have one more, but I'm going to plug before I ask the question. Tatiana has put a survey. It's very short in the chat. And if you all wouldn't mind taking just 2 minutes to do the survey, it really helps support our work and being able to host these webinars. So I'm going to plug that. And then there's another question. Do you all work with tribal courts?
I don't believe we have in the past. I don't know. I don't know of any instances where we have. Most of our cases are through the state courts, occasionally through the municipal courts, and sometimes through the federal courts. But it is possible that has happened in the past, and I just don't know about it.
Yeah, that's a great question. All right, I think that's the last of the questions. Thank you all again. Thank you, David, for sharing with us, and everyone for joining. If you missed part of the webinar or you know someone who wanted to join, we will be sharing the recording to folks who registered. So you can go back and watch the beginning if you came on late. But thank you all for joining. I'm going to stop the recording. And again, please take a few moments to do the survey. It really helps us in our organization to put these on.